going to read you a story.
A story.
It's not a biographical story about an old man. I'm going to come down here, right here, and read it to you. So if you want to come closer, turn around. It's so nice to sit down and sit here. We're in the living room together. Can you hear me at the back? Oh, yeah. This story is called Harold and the Orchid.
Are you Harold or the orchid?
Well, you'll find out. Also, it's a love story. Of sorts. You have to be one of them. Harold didn't have a computer, but he did have a typewriter that he bought with money from his first job cleaning windows before the fall. He also didn't have a radio or a telephone. He didn't have a radio since the days of days when the Saturday morning opera was the only thing worth listening to, or so he thought. It had broken in a storm in the middle of the night before the fall. The telephone had been unplugged a long time before that. So he tended to his bookshelf. He only had 2 books, books with facts, and therefore there was a lot of dust. Everything else had been lost in the fire. Except the dictionary his mother gave him at the age of 13 and a tiny book about how to care for your aging houseplant. His orchid was 35 years old.
What?
Tiny pink and white leaves that looked like a woman's special petals. Or so he had been told. He spent his days with questions. Like, if a vegan mother has a vegan pregnancy, is her baby a vegan if it drinks its mother's milk? And every time he would peek through the window blinds to see someone move over on the sidewalk for a jogger, he would wonder to himself, how is it that everyone thinks whatever they are doing on the sidewalk is more important than whatever everyone else is doing on the sidewalk? And sometimes he started with answers and worked his way back through the questions until he found the one that would fit. The answer was usually, if it is painful, then it might be necessary. When his sister would come to visit once a month, she would tell them about so-and-so and this and that, and she'd bring him new tape for the typewriter, although the fact that it was starting to come in short supply was making Harold panic. She would bring him a new this or a new that and talk about fashion and movies, and when Harold would say, the answer is, if it is painful, then it might be necessary, his sister would check her cell phone and say that she had forgotten that Facebook had said she had something to do. Harold didn't know what Facebook was, but it sounded important in its own kind of way. I mean, he hated the way she was so distracted anyway. On top of that, she never said anything Harold believed was worth listening to. There was never any information about the deep cosmic comedy within her head, and Harold was beginning to believe that perhaps all this information was clouding the questions. His brother stopped in one day and stood in the front hallway and said, a shark ate a man's legs. Another man was taken away by the police for starting a fire. Another woman had her children taken away because she thought they were spiritual reproductions of some fantasy novel and didn't need to eat. And there was a mudslide and 4 people died. Thank you, said Harold. Now I know what's going on. Harold didn't leave his house anymore. After the fall, after the fire, after the gossip about his face and hands, and after what he might have said to someone at some time or another was about something in particular was turned on its side, let go into the vicious tiny hole of the community radio station, and they broadcast it. They broadcast it after everyone was angry, after Harold didn't know what he said, and no one would tell him what he said, after he was the news. After the mystery was gone, and everyone had figured out exactly what he was all about, even though he still didn't know. After all the miscellaneous pieces of information about whatever everyone else was doing with everyone else, after everything he said was treated as entitled opinion. But gee, he'd say, it's a nice day. And the neighbor would say, Harold, what the fuck is that supposed to mean? After everyone's insecurities ate everyone else apart and their own Cosmic-centered comedy had only become about things like, oh, how many french fries they had at the beach yesterday, and oh, how greasy they were, and oh, how the ketchup got down their fingers, and how the seagulls came for the french fries even though they were sandy, and ate them anyway, and how so-and-so did this and that. Instead of the state of the fucking universe, or the state of the fucking environment, or all these thousands of people he'd read about in the streets of Chile, or Montreal, or Spain, or London, or the importance of artists, and the government belittling them into only making static reproductions of themselves to exemplify the static reproductions of sitcom love, or the state of inequality for the fucking people who make everything else everyone else gets to eat or drink or wear or play with except for themselves. After that, it was Harold, and his orchid, and his questions, and the answer, and the silent scepter of the power of presence inside his cosmic comedy, waiting to be a plant. Never accusable of having said the wrong thing, never available for judgment or opinion or the spinning tales of so-called news. Sometimes sharks eat people's legs, he thought. Who fucking cares? Everyone's gonna die one day, and death is more boring than my dictionary. It's only the becoming I am interested in. Then he would get dizzy and have to sleep for a long time to recover. One day, the orchid said to him, Harold, the neatest thing about now is that it is not new. It is also not news. Everything has been now before. After that, he would water, and wait for the day he could find the courage to make love to the sweet petals of truth he knew he would never find in stories.
Yeah.